The room was electric with tension. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on Bill Barr, whose face had turned an angry shade of crimson. His fists clenched at the podium, his voice thundered, cutting through the thick silence like a knife. "You don't know what you're talking about, Crockett. You're out of your depth, and you're playing games with the American people. You think you have all the answers, but the reality is, you're just another politician who's blinded by your own agenda." The camera zoomed in, capturing the furious red of his face, the veins bulging in his neck. The intensity of his words rang in the air, crackling with arrogance and authority. Barr had been in the room too long to be challenged like this, especially by someone like Jasmine Crockett. He stood there, breathing heavily, as if waiting for the room to collectively shrink back in fear. But Crockett? She didn't budge. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Crockett stood tall, the calm in her demeanor like a stark contrast to Barr's storming fury. The weight of the room didn't seem to press on her, her body language open, composed, yet powerful. The silence stretched between them. Then, without missing a beat, Crockett's voice cut through the tension like a blade, calm, but with an undeniable force. "You're right, Mr. Barr," she said, her words deliberate, "I may not know everything. But I know enough to see that you're more concerned with protecting your reputation than protecting the truth." The room held its breath. Every eye was locked on her, the audacity of her response landing like a strike across Barr's face. For a moment, it seemed as if time itself had frozen. The fight wasn't just over words anymore, it was over power, over who would control the narrative. And in that one moment, everything shifted. The camera caught Barr's reaction, his jaw tightening, his arrogance suddenly uncertain, as the crowd shifted uneasily in their seats. But what happened next shocked the entire country. A calm had fallen over the room, but it wasn't the quiet before a storm. It was the beginning of the storm. The clash unfolding between Bill Barr and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just about two people going head-to-head. It was a battle for the very soul of America. Bill Barr, the former Attorney General under President Donald Trump, had long been the embodiment of the establishment, a man who had spent his career protecting the powerful, defending the status quo, and manipulating the system to his benefit. His tenure had been marred by scandal after scandal, from his role in undermining investigations into the Trump administration to his controversial handling of the Mueller report. Barr had always positioned himself as a defender of law and order, but for many, he represented everything wrong with the political establishment: corruption, self-interest, and a blatant disregard for justice when it was inconvenient. Then there was Jasmine Crockett, a rising star from Texas whose meteoric rise in politics had been driven by her unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and accountability. From her outspoken criticism of the police to her tireless work in protecting voting rights, Crockett had become a voice for the marginalized, for those who had been left behind by a system that often favored the rich and powerful. She wasn't just another politician, she was a force, a disruptor, someone who had made a name for herself by challenging the establishment, calling out corruption, and amplifying the voices of the unheard. This moment was more than just a confrontation between two political figures, it was a collision of worldviews. On one side stood Barr, a man whose actions spoke louder than his words, a defender of the elites, someone who had always looked out for those already in power. On the other side stood Crockett, the underdog, fighting for the people who had been silenced for too long. And for the country, this moment was the culmination of years of political division. The air was thick with the realization, the stakes had never been higher. The nation was torn apart, more divided than ever before, each side entrenching itself in its ideology. On one hand, the status quo, the belief that the system was working, that the laws of the land were fair, and that those in power deserved to stay in power. On the other, the call for reform, the call to re-examine the very structures that upheld inequality and injustice. Barr had been the guardian of the old order, defending it at all costs. But Crockett? She was fighting to dismantle it, piece by piece. For America, this was the very definition of a crossroads, a battle between the past and the future. A battle between those who believed the system was just fine and those who had seen too many lives ruined by its flaws. This wasn't just about Barr versus Crockett, it was a showdown between two Americas, with two competing visions of justice, truth, and freedom. The country was watching, divided but eager to see who would come out on top. And what happened next would change the political landscape forever. This wasn't just a fight for power, it was a fight for the future of the nation. Could the establishment continue to hold its grip, or would the rising tide of change finally wash it away? Would the people's voices be heard, or would they be silenced once again? And with every passing second, it was becoming clear, only one side would emerge victorious. Bill Barr wasn't always the figurehead of the establishment that he had become by the time he found himself in the spotlight of the public's disdain. His rise to power had been the result of years spent inside the corridors of Washington, cultivating relationships and maintaining a carefully crafted image of a stalwart defender of law and order. But beneath the polished surface, Barr was something far more dangerous, a man whose belief in his own authority was only matched by his willingness to defend power at any cost. Born into a family that had been intertwined with the legal and political worlds for generations, Barr had always been primed for a career of influence. After graduating from Columbia Law School, he quickly climbed the ranks, eventually becoming the Attorney General of the United States under President George H. W. Bush. His early years in power saw him as a man of the law, someone who was viewed as capable and even-handed. But it was in his second tenure, under President Donald Trump, that Barr would truly show his colors. As the Attorney General in Trump's administration, Barr became a lightning rod for controversy. On the surface, he presented himself as a staunch defender of the law, a man who would fight for truth and justice no matter the consequences. Yet, his actions consistently told a different story. He didn't just bend the rules, he rewrote them. Barr's involvement in the Mueller investigation was perhaps his most glaring misstep. As special counsel Robert Mueller examined possible Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election, Barr inserted himself into the process in ways that raised more than a few eyebrows. First, he famously misrepresented the findings of Mueller's report to the public, spinning the results in a way that fit Trump's narrative. Barr's premature conclusions about the investigation's findings were seen by many as an attempt to shield the president from the looming threat of impeachment. In doing so, Barr undermined the investigation, effectively neutering its potential to hold Trump accountable. This wasn't the action of an impartial defender of the law, it was the act of a man who was so deeply embedded in the political system that he saw his job as protecting the people in power, rather than the people themselves. But it didn't end there. When the Department of Justice took steps to drop charges against Trump's allies, and when Barr took it upon himself to intervene in criminal cases tied to the president, the line between law and politics blurred beyond recognition. Barr's actions were not about serving justice, they were about protecting an agenda. His arrogance became apparent as he silenced critics within the DOJ and sidelined career prosecutors who pushed back against his decisions. He believed himself untouchable, acting with a sense of invulnerability that only someone entrenched in power could possess. The law wasn't something to be upheld, it was something to be used to cement his place at the top. And yet, with all this power, Barr's true flaw lay in the contradictions that he tried to suppress. He projected an image of strength, stoic, determined, a defender of the republic. Yet, the very moves he made to protect his position betrayed a fundamental weakness. His position was built on self-interest, not principle. He used the office of Attorney General as a shield, defending the powerful while ignoring the cries of those who were suffering under the very system he claimed to defend. The most glaring of these contradictions came in his public persona, that of a moral crusader, a man of unwavering values who could be counted on to defend the law at any cost. To the American public, he sold himself as someone who believed in protecting the integrity of the justice system. But when it came to Trump and his associates, Barr's loyalties became clear, they were not with the law, but with the people in power. His position wasn't about right versus wrong, it was about who held the power to control the narrative. The truth, however, was impossible to hide forever. Barr's decisions began to expose cracks in the facade of his infallibility. The people saw through the narrative he was trying to sell. As the media and the public began to question his motives, Barr's credibility took a hit. He had built a career around defending the powerful, but in doing so, he had alienated the very people he was supposed to protect, the American people. His self-serving actions were no longer being tolerated. For years, Barr had managed to stay above the fray, his arrogance and public persona shielding him from the fallout of his decisions. But the more he fought to preserve a system that was built on inequality and injustice, the more vulnerable he became. His sense of authority was starting to unravel. He no longer seemed like a man in control of the situation, he seemed like a man desperate to hold on to power. This was Barr's fatal flaw, his belief that the rules didn't apply to him, that his decisions could be justified as long as they preserved the status quo. But the truth was that the world was changing, and Barr, clinging to the past, was beginning to look more like an outdated relic than a powerful figure. And now, with Jasmine Crockett standing before him, poised and determined, Barr's carefully constructed world was starting to come apart. The walls he had built around himself were no longer as solid as he had once believed. The moment of reckoning was near. The question remained, would he be able to maintain his grip on power, or would Crockett's rising tide be the force that washed it all away? Jasmine Crockett wasn't born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Her rise to political prominence wasn't a story of privilege or connections, it was a story of struggle, of defying the odds, of standing up when the world seemed determined to push her down. Her roots ran deep in Dallas, Texas, a city that had long been divided by race, class, and injustice. But Crockett had something that no one could take from her, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She was raised in a working-class neighborhood, the daughter of immigrants, a family that understood the weight of hardship and the promise of opportunity. From an early age, she saw firsthand what it meant to be invisible to those in power. The systemic inequalities that shaped her community were clear to her: black families struggling to get ahead in a system designed to keep them behind, children whose futures were limited by the color of their skin, neighborhoods that were left to rot while the powerful looked the other way. But for Crockett, those early years weren't just a lesson in injustice, they were the spark that ignited her mission. She knew that something had to change, and she knew that if no one else was going to fight for it, she would. Her fight was never about personal gain, it was about righting the wrongs that had been written into the fabric of America itself. Her passion for justice was sparked by a devastating experience in her early adulthood. When she was in her 20s, her older brother was wrongfully arrested by a group of police officers during a routine traffic stop, a routine that turned violent when he was pulled from his car and thrown to the ground. The officers accused him of resisting arrest, but the truth was that he had been compliant, frightened, and caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The brutality with which he was treated left Crockett reeling, but it also pushed her toward a mission she hadn't fully recognized yet: reforming a broken system. At that moment, Crockett didn't just see the injustice her family had faced, she saw the larger pattern, the vast network of systemic racism, police brutality, and the unchecked power of authority figures that caused lives like her brother's to be ruined. It wasn't just a singular incident, it was part of a much deeper problem. And it was a problem that demanded action. From then on, she made a vow to herself, to never be silent, to use her voice, her position, and her growing platform to dismantle the systems that allowed such abuses of power to continue. She went on to graduate from Texas Southern University's Thurgood Marshall School of Law, where she became known as an outspoken advocate for civil rights. As she built her career in public service, she took on cases that others shied away from, cases of police misconduct, voter suppression, and discrimination. Her legal acumen was sharp, but it was her passion that made her a force to be reckoned with. She didn't just represent clients, she represented a movement, a fight for justice, and the marginalized communities that had too often been silenced. It was during this time that Crockett became deeply involved in the struggle for police reform, a cause that was close to her heart after her brother's ordeal. She saw firsthand the damage caused by unchecked police power, the destruction of lives, the broken trust between law enforcement and communities of color. She fought tirelessly to advocate for more accountability, pushing for policies that would hold officers responsible for misconduct, as well as working to dismantle policies that disproportionately impacted black and brown communities. For Crockett, this wasn't just a political stance, it was personal. Her advocacy wasn't without its cost. She was frequently attacked by those in power, demonized by the very institutions she sought to reform. She received death threats, faced smear campaigns, and found herself at odds with people who claimed to be defenders of law and order. But she stood firm. Her commitment to the truth and the well-being of those without a voice only grew stronger with every challenge she faced. Her fight was never for popularity, it was for the dignity and rights of the people she represented. It was Crockett's unique understanding of what it meant to be voiceless that made her such a powerful force in politics. She wasn't just an outsider looking in, she was someone who had lived through the injustices she was fighting to correct. Her empathy was not theoretical, it was rooted in real, lived experience. She didn't need a lecture on the problems of the criminal justice system, she'd lived them. Her election to the Texas House of Representatives wasn't a matter of destiny, it was the result of a tireless, relentless push for change. Crockett's platform was built on accountability, justice, and progressive values, the same values that had fueled her entire career. She wasn't in politics for the power or the perks. She was there to change the system, to confront the powers that be, and to push America toward a more just and equitable future. But even as she gained national attention and became a rising star, she knew the true fight was just beginning. Bill Barr, the establishment's enforcer, had spent his life protecting a system that had allowed corruption, inequality, and injustice to flourish. Crockett wasn't just up against Barr as an individual, she was up against the entire structure of power that had enabled men like him to thrive. Her fight was America's fight, and Crockett was prepared to face it head-on. She didn't just see herself as a politician, she was a warrior for the people. And as she stood in front of Bill Barr, poised and ready to take him on, Crockett wasn't just fighting for her own legacy. She was fighting for the soul of America, the dream that all people, regardless of race, class, or background, could live in a country where justice truly existed for all. In that moment, Crockett knew what was at stake. It was not just her political future, it was the future of the country itself. And this battle? It was hers to win. The air in the room felt thick, as if the very walls were pressing in on the speakers. The first shots had been fired, but the tension between Bill Barr and Jasmine Crockett was far from over. This wasn't just a debate. It was a battle for the future of America, a contest not of personalities but of ideologies, and with each passing second, it became clearer that this clash wasn't going to be resolved with facts alone. Bill Barr, his face redder than before, leaned into the microphone. He was a man used to commanding attention, and he wasn't about to let a newcomer like Crockett get the best of him. "You've got no idea what you're talking about, Crockett." Barr's voice boomed, his words laced with aggression. "You and your ilk, you think you can just tear down the very institutions that make this country great? You think the law doesn't matter, that accountability is just a political game? Let me tell you something, you have no respect for the very system that's kept this country running for decades." Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her response was calm, controlled, ruthless in its precision. "You're right, Mr. Barr," she said, her voice a perfect contrast to his thunderous tone. "I don't respect a system that has repeatedly failed the people it's meant to protect." The room fell silent. Even Barr paused, taken aback by her composure. He wasn't used to being met with defiance, especially not from someone like Crockett, who had only recently arrived on the national stage. "You think this is some kind of game, don't you?" Barr sneered. "You're just another politician trying to tear down the very foundation of law and order, trying to turn America into something it's not. You want to talk about reform, but what you really want is chaos, anarchy, where lawlessness reigns and the people you claim to care about suffer more than ever." Crockett's eyes narrowed, her voice cutting through the air with an edge so sharp, it could have severed the tension in the room. "No, Mr. Barr," she shot back, her tone unwavering, "what I want is a country where the law applies to everyone." Her words echoed in the silence. "A country where power doesn't protect the rich, the corrupt, and the privileged, where it protects people like my brother, who was brutalized by the very system you defend." Barr's face twisted into a snarl. He wasn't used to being called out so bluntly, and he could feel his control slipping. But he wasn't going to let this young upstart take the upper hand. He leaned forward again, his voice rising, laced with authority and venom. "This is exactly what's wrong with your thinking, Crockett. You're so obsessed with your ideological fantasy that you fail to see the bigger picture. You want to change the system, but what you don't realize is that a stable society requires law, order, and structure. Without that, we fall into chaos." The room was now hanging on every word, the tension building like a crescendo, the stakes rising with every exchange. The cameras were rolling, but it wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a spectacle, a war of wills, a fight for control over the nation's very identity. "And what about the millions of people who've been left behind by your system?" Crockett countered, her voice rising with quiet authority. "The people you claim to protect, but have ignored for generations. The black and brown communities that have been systematically disenfranchised, the poor who have been left to rot, while you and your friends in power live comfortably in your ivory towers. Tell me, Mr. Barr, who exactly are you protecting?" Barr's eyes flashed with fury. The room seemed to tense, the space around them contracting. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a collision of worlds. He took a deep breath, but his voice cracked slightly when he spoke. "I protect the American way of life, Crockett. The American dream." His tone wavered, but his words were heavy with intent. "What you're proposing isn't reform. It's destruction." But Crockett didn't back down. Her response was swift, her resolve like steel. "No, Mr. Barr," she said, each word carrying the weight of years of struggle. "What I'm proposing is a society where the dream is real for everyone, not just for the wealthy and powerful. I'm proposing a country where no one is left behind, where no one is discarded because they don't have the right skin color or the right background." Barr's fists clenched at the podium, his face contorting with frustration. He could feel the room shifting. The authority he once wielded so easily was slipping away, replaced by the raw emotion of a nation ready for change. "You think you can just tear it all down, Crockett?" Barr's voice was tight, barely contained. "You have no idea what you're asking for. You want to destroy everything this country has fought for, and for what? A pipe dream?" But Crockett was unwavering. Her voice rang out, louder now, not in anger, but with unshakable conviction. "No, Mr. Barr. I want to build a better country," she said, stepping forward slightly. "A country where the dream isn't just for the rich, but for everyone." There was a shift in the room. The tension was palpable, but Crockett's calm resolve had become contagious. Barr's arrogance faltered, his grip on the debate slipping. His tone softened for a moment, just enough to betray his uncertainty. The clash wasn't just personal anymore, it was ideological, a battle of the future versus the past. The walls between the two worlds had come down, and now, they stood on the precipice of something bigger than both of them. Something that would forever reshape the course of America. And for the first time, Bill Barr knew he was losing. The tension in the room was now unbearable. Every eye was locked on Jasmine Crockett and Bill Barr, and every word spoken felt like it carried the weight of an entire nation. The battle of words had reached a boiling point, but what happened next would be the moment that defined this entire confrontation. Barr, visibly sweating under the weight of his own aggression, tried once more to regain control. "This is exactly why people like you shouldn't be in power. You're reckless, you don't understand the full scope of what it takes to govern. You think you can just wave a magic wand and fix everything, but the truth is, Crockett, your ideas are dangerous." He leaned forward, staring her down with a mixture of disdain and frustration. He was trying to intimidate her, trying to break her focus. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her eyes were locked on him, unwavering, as if she could see right through him. For a moment, the entire room held its breath. Barr had thrown everything he had at her, his voice full of venom, his words designed to tear her down. But Crockett wasn't just standing her ground anymore, she was preparing to launch the final blow. And then, the silence. Crockett spoke. Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words was like an avalanche. You talk about protecting the American way of life, Mr. Barr, but you've spent your entire career protecting a version of America that doesn't exist for most of us. The crowd was silent. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she said them. Calm. Collected. Unshakable. You think the system is fine because it works for people like you, Crockett continued, her eyes never leaving his. But it hasn't worked for everyone else. You're talking about law and order, but what you really mean is maintaining the status quo, a status quo that locks out millions of people from opportunities, from dignity, from justice. And you stand there pretending it's all working perfectly. She let her words hang in the air for a moment. The camera cut to Barr, his jaw was tight, his face reddened with frustration, his fists gripping the podium. He knew the truth in what she was saying, but he wasn't willing to admit it, not publicly, not with the world watching. The truth is, Crockett continued, her voice now carrying a weight of certainty, the system you're defending has been rigged. It was never meant to be fair. It was never meant to be just. It was meant to protect people like you. People who could hide behind a title, behind a law, behind their privilege. You've spent your life defending the powerful while the rest of us fought for scraps. And now, when the people finally rise up and say enough is enough, you act like it's some kind of threat to this great nation. Well, let me tell you something, this country has always been great when it has stood up for the people, not when it has protected the powerful. There was a pause, a long, deafening silence. The kind of silence that only comes when something monumental is being said, when the truth has been laid bare and no one can deny it. Barr's face twitched. He had no answer, nothing left to say, because the weight of her words had pierced through him like a knife. But Crockett wasn't done. Her final words came like a wave crashing down. You and people like you have been telling us for decades that we need to follow the rules, that we need to respect authority. But what happens when that authority is the problem? When the rules were designed to benefit only a few, to crush the rest of us? Mr. Barr, you spent your entire career making sure the people in power stay in power. But I'm here to tell you, it's over. There it was. The mic drop moment. The tension in the room shattered. The crowd, which had been on the edge of their seats, now erupted. Applause, cheers, and shouts filled the air, they were witnessing a moment of history. Crockett had just dismantled one of the most powerful figures in American politics, not with anger, not with hysteria, but with facts, truth, and irrefutable logic. Bill Barr's face, once so confident and commanding, was now a mask of discomfort and uncertainty. His hands gripped the sides of the podium, knuckles white with the strain. For the first time in the entire exchange, he looked small. He was no longer the towering figure of authority he had been at the start of the debate. Crockett's words had stripped him of that illusion. The camera zoomed in on Barr, he didn't even respond. There was no defense, no rebuttal. His facade had crumbled. He had nothing left to offer. The weight of his own arrogance had come crashing down on him. And all around the room, the energy was palpable. Social media was already exploding, hashtags trending in real time. Hashtag Crockett crushes Barr was everywhere. Commentators on television scrambled to analyze what had just happened, but no one could deny what had been laid out before them. The world was watching. And in that moment, America knew, Jasmine Crockett had won. The tension was still thick in the air, but it wasn't just the anticipation of Barr's next move, it was the certainty that he had no move left. He had been outmatched, outwitted, and outclassed. But Crockett? She stood there, unshaken, a figure of unyielding strength and determination. She had done what few could ever do, she had taken down a political titan, not through shouting or theatrics, but through the power of truth. The crowd's applause grew louder, the room swelling with the kind of energy reserved for historic moments. This wasn't just a debate, it was the end of one era and the beginning of another. And as the camera panned out, it was clear, America had just witnessed a turning point. The moment Crockett took down Barr wasn't just a high point of a debate, it became a defining moment in American political history. Within minutes, the aftermath began to ripple out in ways no one could have predicted. Social media exploded. The world seemed to stand still for a moment before the floodgates opened. Thousands of tweets, posts, and memes flooded timelines, each more creative, more passionate than the last. Crockett's name was trending everywhere, her words reverberating across the internet like a battle cry. Hashtag Crockett crushes Barr was everywhere. People from across the political spectrum were weighing in. Progressive activists were practically shouting from the rooftops. Finally, someone called out the establishment. One tweet read, "She's the future. We need more politicians like her." Memes celebrating her mic drop moment flooded Instagram and Twitter. Some showed Crockett standing over Barr like a champion, with Barr's face photoshopped into the form of a deflated balloon. Others took a more biting approach, captioning stills of Barr's stunned silence with snarky lines like, "When the system finally meets someone who isn't afraid to tear it down." On Facebook, videos of the moment went viral, with millions of shares and comments. The conversation exploded into political circles, with hashtags like #NewAmerica and #JusticeForAll trending across different platforms. Celebrities jumped on board too. Alicia Keys, the Grammy-winning artist and activist, tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just showed us how to bring the heat and the truth. This is the leadership we need." Her tweet went viral in minutes, with thousands of people responding in support. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the biggest progressive voices in Congress, posted a simple tweet that resonated with her millions of followers: "This is what accountability looks like." It was a clear nod to Crockett's boldness and her victory in taking down Barr, someone who had long been considered untouchable by many in Washington. But not everyone was celebrating. The conservative wing of America, fueled by Barr's base, pushed back just as fiercely. Right-wing commentators and Republican politicians rushed to Barr's defense. This was a setup, one tweet from a popular conservative news host claimed. Crockett is using emotions over facts. Barr was doing his job. Fox News picked up the story quickly, hosting a panel of pundits ready to tear into Crockett's victory. One commentator claimed that Crockett had been disrespectful and out of her league in challenging Barr. The right-wing echo chambers rallied around Barr, casting Crockett's words as an attack on law and order, the very foundation of American society, they said. They painted Crockett as a radical, someone who wanted to tear down the American system. But despite the backlash, the overall sentiment on social media was overwhelmingly in support of Crockett. Her supporters rallied behind her with a newfound fervor. She wasn't just a rising star, she was now a symbol of the people's voice, of the fight for justice, and for those who had been ignored for far too long. On CNN, commentators marveled at the historical weight of the moment. "What we saw today was a pivotal moment in American politics," one analyst said. Crockett didn't just win a debate, she shifted the narrative. She's not just a congresswoman anymore, she's become the leader of a movement. The ripple effect of this moment didn't stop at social media. Journalists from across the political spectrum were scrambling to analyze Crockett's performance. The Washington Post, in an editorial, declared that the confrontation marked the end of the old guard in Washington and noted that Crockett's victory was more than just a personal achievement, it was a sign of the growing progressive power within the political system. But as much as the media tried to process what had happened, they couldn't ignore the underlying truth. This wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was a cultural shift. Crockett had given a voice to those who felt ignored, those who had been pushed aside by the political elites. She had become a lightning rod for change, a figure who represented a turning tide in America's political landscape. Political figures from all sides were now weighing in. On the left, senators, activists, and even former Democratic presidential candidates voiced their support. Crockett didn't just challenge Barr, she challenged an entire system, said Bernie Sanders in an impassioned tweet. This is what the future of America looks like. But the divide was stark. On the right, former Trump administration officials rushed to Barr's defense. One wrote, "Jasmine Crockett might have won the debate, but she's part of a dangerous movement that seeks to undo everything this country was built on." The narrative was clear: they would not let her win this easily. In Washington, Crockett's colleagues could feel the change in the air. Her phone was ringing off the hook with messages of congratulations and support. One call came from Elizabeth Warren, who, after a brief conversation, released a tweet: "Crockett just proved that courage is the most powerful weapon in politics. We've got your back, Jasmine. The fight for justice is just beginning." As the hours passed, more media outlets weighed in, all of them discussing the same thing: Crockett's powerful rise from a local leader to a national force. The sheer magnitude of her performance couldn't be ignored. This wasn't just another politician making a statement, it was a call to action for a generation that had been waiting for a new kind of leadership. America was waking up. The immediate aftermath was chaotic, but it was clear that Crockett had shifted the narrative. The national conversation was no longer about Barr's defense of power, it was about Crockett's challenge to that very system. The nation was divided, yes, but there was no denying that Crockett had made her mark. Her words were no longer just her own, they were the words of a movement that had been simmering for years, waiting for someone to step up and speak for them. And as the day turned to night, one thing was clear: Crockett had become the face of change. The question now wasn't whether she had won, it was how far this victory would take her. The political landscape had shifted, and everyone was waiting to see what would come next. The echoes of the confrontation still resonated in the air as Jasmine Crockett stood at the podium, her voice steady and clear. The battle had been won, but the fight for America's soul was just beginning. This wasn't a moment about personal triumph, it was about something much bigger. Crockett had risen, not just to challenge a political titan, but to stand for the values that America was meant to embody: truth, justice, and the unyielding belief that power should be held accountable, not protected at all costs. She took a deep breath and looked out at the audience, feeling the weight of the moment. The words that would follow weren't just for those in the room, they were for the people watching, for the ones whose voices had been drowned out for far too long. What we witnessed today was not about me versus Bill Barr. It wasn't a personal vendetta, nor was it a fight for power. This battle was about something much more fundamental. It was about the future of this country. It was about the truth. It was about justice. And it was about holding the powerful accountable. Her words were like a mirror held up to the nation, clear, concise, and impossible to ignore. She paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle over the crowd. The room was silent, hanging on to every syllable. The confrontation wasn't just a spectacle. It was a clarion call to anyone who had ever felt like their voice didn't matter. We live in a world where power is often used to protect the rich, the privileged, the ones who have always controlled the narrative. But power, when used responsibly, is supposed to protect everyone, not just those who can afford to wield it. Too many times, we've seen those in power defend a broken system. A system that hurts the most vulnerable and rewards the corrupt. That's not America. That's not who we are. And that's not what this country is supposed to stand for. Her voice softened, but the resolve in it was undeniable. Crockett wasn't just addressing the room, she was speaking directly to the hearts of the millions who had been waiting for someone to stand up for them. Today, we stood up to the forces that have tried to keep us silent. Today, we said, enough. We said that dignity, truth, and service to the people will always triumph over corruption, arrogance, and greed. That the people's voice is more powerful than any individual, any institution, or any system that seeks to oppress us. That is what this moment was about. That is what this victory represents. She could feel the strength of the movement behind her. It wasn't just about her, it was about all of them. It was about the countless individuals who had fought for justice, who had fought for equality, who had fought for a chance to be seen and heard. Crockett's victory wasn't a single moment in time, it was the beginning of something much larger. This fight isn't over. It will never be over until we've created a country that truly lives up to its ideals. A country where justice isn't just an idea, but a reality. A country where dignity isn't just a privilege of the few, but a right for all. The room was still. Her words hung in the air, rippling outward like a wave, sweeping across the nation. This wasn't just about one political battle, it was about an ideological shift. Crockett wasn't simply declaring victory over Barr. She was declaring a victory over everything the system had stood for, everything it had protected at the expense of the American people. Let us remember this day not for the drama of the debate, but for what it represents. It's a reminder that we cannot be afraid to challenge the status quo. We cannot be afraid to stand up, to speak the truth, even when it feels like the weight of the world is pushing back against us. We cannot be afraid to say what is right, even when the powerful tell us to stay silent. We have the power to change the world, not with hatred or division, but with truth and unity. Crockett's eyes scanned the room, and then she addressed the nation directly, her voice filled with pride and optimism. This is the future of America, the America where every voice matters. The America where truth wins out. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones who will bring about the change this country needs. We are the ones who will rise up and fight, because the fight is for the soul of this nation, and that fight, that truth, will always win in the end. As she finished, a profound silence hung in the air. It was the kind of silence that follows a statement of undeniable truth, a silence that makes room for reflection, for understanding, for action. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a politician. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the future that could be. Her victory over Barr had been more than just a political win, it had been a message, a call to arms for everyone who had ever felt oppressed, unheard, or forgotten. She stood tall, her heart beating with the knowledge that this moment was the spark of a much larger fire, a fire that could change the nation, and the world, for the better. And as the crowd erupted into applause, the truth was undeniable, Crockett had won not just for herself, but for all of America. What we witnessed today wasn't just a political battle, it was a statement. Jasmine Crockett stood up and took down one of the most powerful figures in American politics, not with anger or theatrics, but with truth, dignity, and courage. This victory wasn't just for Crockett, it was for every single person who believes in justice, equality, and the power of the people to challenge the corrupt systems that have held us back for so long. As we close this chapter, let's remember what this moment truly represents, the power of standing up for what is right. In the face of overwhelming odds, Crockett showed us that when we speak the truth, when we challenge the status quo with integrity, we can change the course of history. This isn't just her victory, it's our victory. Now, it's up to you to carry this message forward. We've seen what happens when one person refuses to back down. Now, it's your turn. If you believe in justice, if you believe in truth, if you believe in standing up to the powerful, take action now. Like, share, and subscribe, because the fight for justice is just beginning. Comment below and let us know how you're going to be part of this movement for change. Every voice matters. Every action counts. Join the movement. Stand with us. Together, we can make sure that dignity and truth always triumph over corruption and greed. We can make sure that America's soul is one of justice, equality, and service to the people. Don't just watch the change, be part of it.